So first, I want to say I am glad to be back with Parents Challenge. I seem to find myself in front of this audience quite a bit. I think it's just because I really, really like Deborah and think she's
Thank you.
think she's pretty cool. I really like her work ethic and what she's trying to do. So to continue to invite me back is special. And you know, I've heard from several of you parents after several other presentations that you also kind of enjoy the conversations that we're having. And so I want to say thank you for that too. So I know you have a part in bringing me back as well. I want to start off by recognizing kind of the difficult and unusual times that we're in right now with COVID-19 and parents and school systems trying to find their way around a new kind of existence, whether it's existing as a parent or existing as a couple in the same house for a long time, or just existing in school. The way school is happening right now is unlike anything that we've ever experienced for the long term, unless you have gone to college and kind of got on some online courses, so you kind of know how this works just a little bit. So I want to just acknowledge that, you know, these are difficult times, and maybe this moment tonight to be able to connect with people on screens, probably some sort of reprieve for you. Like, oh, I get to focus on something different other than what I've been locked in the house doing. And so hopefully I'm able to be worth your time. The session tonight is super interesting to me, and I was looking forward to being there in person last month when we were supposed to be in person, but of course all this happened because I wanted to see your faces, right? I wanted to see your faces when we started talking about some of these things and how you move about in your seats when you get antsy or disagree with some of the things I've said in the past. I wanted to see that because as a presenter, like, those things are valuable information as well. But digital boy versus natural boy is something that I think is appropriate right now, being that everyone is having to be the digital versions of themselves in a lot of cases, whether that's paying bills or whether that's, you know, renewing license plates, or now kids are at school and so on and so forth. And a lot of you who are able to work from home are probably having Zoom meetings and all kind of team meetings online. So you're operating in the digital version of yourself, right? And it's not always the most natural version of yourself. So tonight, this conversation about digital boy versus natural boy is about knowing that, or understanding that kids, and in this particular case, boys, can grow up without technology or they can grow up with technology, but either one of those pathways can have a significant output on who this kid ends up being. And because boys and girls are uniquely kind of developed and formed in the womb, as well as based on the estrogen and testosterone, technology can play a number on these young men. And so tonight we're going to talk about this male maturity map from birth to age 13, and then hopefully, if I'm invited back, we can do age 14 to age 21. We're going to parallel what it would look like if kids did not have this technology in their life, and when kids have this technology in their life, like this overuse of technology. Just a few logistics. I want to say that if you have any questions, I want you, as I go along, I'm going to have a break as a part of the presentation, but I want you to post your questions in the chat box. And then when I stop to go for this chat break, I'll pull those questions up and I'll answer those questions. Then we'll move on to the second half of the presentation. We are about to, as a Simfelder Foundation, launch our parent online workshop series, and it's free to parents. And if you are interested in being a part of that, and jumping on and experiencing some other workshops around working with boys, send me your email at info@sffoundation.org, and that's info@sffoundation.org, and that way you'll get on our email list and you'll know when those workshops are being presented. All right, so let's get going. Boom. So on this first slide, there's a couple of things that I want to point out, right? Um, that excessive screen time, we're talking about televisions and computers and phones and tablets, like these for boys in particular, because of the Y chromosome and because of the impact of testosterone, and also because of how boys, like the Y chromosome tends to have boys lean towards a more physical, active, and aggressive kind of spatial orientation. That excessive screen time can be very detrimental, right? It could be toxic to their development, and over time, you'll get a boy that may be withdrawn, or really focused on video games, or not as verbal, or having hard times with social interaction, dysfunction around like sexual activity and attraction. So we'll talk about that and what can lead to that. But on this first screen, I want you to focus on 5 points in particular. And that's one is limit screen time. And you'll hear me say throughout the presentation that to limit screen time, and we're talking about phones, tablets, computers, to 1 hour at a time, 1 hour at a time, then take a break and go back. And if you can, the best case scenario is about 1 to 2 hours a day. And as we go through the presentation, you'll see how I bring up information to kind of support those things. Number two, if you allow the use of electronic devices, spend most of that time with education and media and not entertainment. And I know right now with school being online and being remote, like you're definitely getting that time. But here's what you don't do, right? Don't allow them to be in school for 2 and 3 hours on the computer and then plop them in front of the screen to be in front of the screen for another 2 or 3 hours on something totally different. There's a lot of impact that can happen from the blue light that comes from those screens. And also you'll see just from the neurological development of young men as we move through the presentation, what I'm talking about in particular. Do not, and I say on number 4, I know I say rarely, but man, do not sacrifice outside playtime for media time. I've been so happy to see during this quarantine time that I've seen so many kids out in our neighborhood playing for the first time. They're on scooters, they're playing basketball, and they're running and they're racing. Those are the things that I used to do as a young man. And as a young man, that kinesthetic movement, that active movement, plays a part of my development. And we'll talk about that too. But I'm so glad that this is the one. I think this is a very positive outcome that's coming out of this, is that even kids are getting tired of being, cooped up in the house, and they want to go outside and play traditional sports. And number 5, please don't sacrifice reading time for media time. Like, reading time is much more valuable for brain development than screen time, right? And especially in the youngest of our brains. So these are some general kind of through lines and a general overview that you'll see that will weave throughout the entire presentation. On this next screen, we'll talk about brains. Like, boys' brains are prone to overemphasize visual learning. Now, I want you to hear me, because I'm going to make this connection. Boys' brains are prone to overemphasize visual learning. It's why men are attracted to the visual sensory of women. Women tend to be attracted more to how you make me feel. Can you make me laugh? Do I feel secure? A man's initial attraction to a woman is how you look. Do you look enticing enough for me to come over and have a conversation with you, right? That doesn't just start with being a man. Like, that starts with being very, very young. It's part of how boys, how we're wired. It's part of how we're wired. It's what that Y chromosome, that testosterone, does to us. And so think about it. If we're visually stimulated and we're attracted to things that are visual, if you put a screen in front of me, you put a computer in front of me, you put a phone in front of me, those things that are visual, it's going to cause me to focus on it even more, because I am focused and drawn to this visual piece. And we'll show you later how that just kind of, can lead boys to getting into trouble because of this natural proclivity or this natural attraction to young men towards visual stimuli. The second thing here on this screen, we're talking about, boys need a lot of physical time to play, to develop socio-emotional skills and brain centers, as well as cognitive fluency. I want to stop for a minute and define what cognitive fluency is. It seems like this kind of this big term. Well, let me explain what this is. Cognitive fluency is the ease of thinking about something that you have to do. The ease of thinking about something that you have to do. For example, for those of you who cook, right? It's probably a lot easier to think about cooking a hot dog than to fix, a pan of lasagna, right? When you think about cooking a hot dog, you're probably thinking about I'm dropping this hot dog in some water. I'm gonna turn the heat on. It's gonna boil. Blah blah blah. Lasagna requires a little more thought, right? You got to think about what cheeses you're gonna use and what pastas you're gonna use. Blah blah blah. Like so, cognitive fluency, right, is how easy is it for you to think about something you have to do, not necessarily the project itself, not necessarily the complexity of cooking lasagna, but the thought about cooking the lasagna. And here's the deal. When boys do not develop the ability to think about things naturally because their brain is drawn towards some sort of over visualized stimuli like a screen, then later in life, their ability to have cognitive fluency diminishes and everything becomes hard to them. Everything, when they think about anything, it becomes hard. They start to push away and not do things and so on and so forth. So this is one of the downfalls of just this overexposure of screen time. And I made some notes here just to kind of make sure I don't forget anything I want to talk about. The last point here, it says that in male brains, prolonged and hands-on contact can even be more essential, right, for social emotional development, because male brains naturally develop fewer of these pathways without it. Let me explain that to you. When young men are born, the Y chromosome and testosterone causes young men to be very active, action-oriented, aggressive. The social, emotional, and the emotive parts of the brain, emotive, E-M-O-T-I-V-E, meaning emotional parts of the brain, are not developed as much. The way that develops in young men is that they have actual human interaction time, that you allow them to play, you talk to them, you have conversations with them about their environment. If you plop them in front of a screen, then the visual attraction, the visual part of their brain is going to kind of be drawn to, wow, here's something visual, here's something that's visually stimulating to me because this is what, the Y chromosome does to me. So if you do that and you plop them in front of a screen, or you allow them to play video games all day, or you allow them to chat with their friends on video all day, guess what they're losing? They're losing that human touch. They're losing the ability to develop social, emotional development, because our brains are naturally tied to visual stimuli. So this is so when you think about natural boy, right? No screen, no computer, playing with mom, dad, playing in the yard, talking, describing things in the house, having conversation. That's the way the brain naturally develops. That's how the boy naturally develops. Versus, hey, go get on your Game Boy, go get on your screen, take your phone, play your game all day. That's a very different boy. That's a very different boy. And so those boys tend to grow up and be like socially withdrawn. They're less likely to have the ability to have really deep conversations with people, really verbose conversations with people. Boys are already naturally less verbose than girls anyway, because of the way our brains are developed. But you take away just a little bit of opportunity for them to develop language and all those things and social skills through an overexposure of screen time, then it makes it even worse. It makes it even worse. So as a part of our journey today, these are the 7 stages in terms of male brain maturity. And these are the time frames at which they happen, right? Pre-birth to 2 years old, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, and so on and so forth. We're going to get to number 4 tonight. We're going to get to 10 to 13. And then if I'm invited back, then we'll do 14 to 25 and beyond. Or you can chime into one of the ones that we're going to do through the Sims Fellow Foundation. Let me grab some water. So what we're talking about tonight is this male maturity map, right? Birth to age 13. So I'm gonna take you on this map of what to do and what not to do at those different age bands for your young men. So here we go. Birth to 2 years old, right? Those are some great pictures, right? Smiling, everything is in front of them. It's a lot of possibilities, right? No one's gotten suspended yet, any of that, right? All right. So birth to 2 years old. This is stage 1. And I said before here that because of this Y chromosome, let me get my notes together here. Because of this Y chromosome, boys often develop their gross motor skills. And this is that hands-on stuff, right? Let me say something. Kindergarten is now the new first grade. And because of that, boys are falling further and further behind in school, both in terms of interest and the ability to perform. And let me tell you why. Let me do a deeper dive here. Around the age of 4 or 5 years old, boys are really good at, this gross motor skills. Kindergarten used to be, doing a little coloring. Can you move your fingers? Can you move around? A lot of gross motor skills, right? Now it's about, can you read? Can you do math? Like, it's a whole bunch of text. It's a whole bunch of, analysis. That's not good for boys, because boys do not develop that ability to access sort of their prefrontal cortex kind of thinking and analyzing until they get to the age of 6. So parents who can afford it, typically hold their young men back a year. And so when they become 6 years old, then they put them in school. But you have a lot of parents, to include my parents when I was younger, who had to work 2 or 3 jobs to make it work. They couldn't afford to not take the kid to school, and they couldn't afford to have one parent at home. But those who can, they know the science behind this, and they set their boys up for success a lot better by making sure that their education is in alignment with their biological development, right? Parenting doesn't come with a handbook. You don't know this, but now because you're part of this class, maybe you know this, right? But boys develop this significant, right, spatial, mechanical, visual, graphic centers that girls do not develop as completely, right, because of their word development. Now, I'm going to get a little technical with you here. On the front left-hand side of the brain, girls develop this real word-dependent ability to develop emotive as well as linguistic skills a lot better than boys. Boys on the right-hand side, the front right-hand side of the brain, develop more of the spatial, physical, which is why boys are a lot rougher. They like to touch, they like to move, they like to move things around, break things, and put things back apart. Now, girls get that too, but because of what the X chromosome does to them, not only do they have all the word and linguistic development on this side, it actually slides over to this side as well. Doesn't happen for boys. This is all boy. This is all moving around. This is less conversation, all of that stuff, right? And so this is what's happening in that birth to 2 years age, 2 years of age. And what we keep saying, that screen time in stage 1 should be kept at a bare minimum. I hope there's no one out there who has a kid 1 or 2 years old, plopping them in front of the screen and letting them hold your phone all day, because that's not the best thing for them. I had this note about this slide, and I said boys have a special vulnerability here because they are naturally more likely than females to attach their maturation, right, to the whatever available stimuli is present, and they detach from word production. Think about it. 1, 2 years old, you got a screen in front of them, or they're using your phone and they're playing games. They're not talking very much. You're not talking to them very much. Maybe you give them the screen because you got to go work, or maybe you give them the screen because you just want them to be quiet, right? They throw a fit and you give it to them, right? But that's less conversation, that's less word development, and it's easier for you, but over the long term, you're limiting their ability to develop an extensive vocabulary, and also just the cognitive fluency, right, of thinking about even having a conversation. A lot of times boys don't have conversations for a couple of reasons, right? One is because girls are naturally more verbose and emotive than boys are. Verbose meaning I have more words, I can talk, I can put my sentences together, right? Which is why men, we tend to lose arguments with girls. Like, we come back an hour later and try to figure it out, right? We're like, man, I wish I should have said this, right? But she's won the argument and going on, right? It's one of the reasons why girls can win in that space. And when you think about emotive is emotional. It's one of the reasons why girls can have a really logical conversation with you and be totally emotional at the same time. Like like they know exactly what they're doing, how they're feeling, and they can produce the words to have the conversation. We can't all the time. Men, we tend to compartmentalize our emotive and our verbal abilities, right? Either we're super upset about, super emotional about something, right? And we can't really find the words to talk about it, or we've detached from it and we can have a conversation about it, but we're not very emotional about it. And then this is when, at least in my experience, your girlfriend or your wife, your girlfriend or your wife says, so you don't feel anything about this? Like, yeah, I feel about it, right? But I'm not emotive about it at this point, right? There are times when I get emotive and I have to go away. I got to drive and come back. I need to step away from the conversation. Then we can have the conversation, right? But women can do both at the same time because of this ability, because of the way that the brain is wired, and because of how it develops, right? So because of that, so this makes excessive screen time a significant potential neurotoxin to boys in their early lives, all right? So birth to 2 years old, let's continue. So until stage 2, right? And that's, being 3 years old to 6 years old, avoid putting screens in front of boys. I'll say it again, avoid putting screens in front of boys, whether it's child gazing, and child gazing is, how you can be there on your phone and you got your baby next to you or your kid next to you and your kid just start looking at your phone and just, whatever. Like that's child gazing. Like avoid that. And also, I said again, avoid, them, like you putting the phone in front of them for them to play games. Again, why, Dedrick? Because the boy's brain, I'm gonna keep repeating these things because as we go, I need you to have this scaffold. Because boy's brain, because of the Y chromosome, is drawn to interact in the world in a more visual way. And if you over interact with the world in this visual way, you lose the ability, or you lose the time required to develop your emotive, socio-emotional skills and your linguistic skills. I'm already inclined to, be here visually. Like, don't encourage it, right? It's like, it's like teasing someone who's addicted to something and you have it in front of them, right? It's like you really going to force them not to engage in it. More than an hour every day in front of a screen will do damage to boys at this stage, right? At this stage, so birth to 2 years old. And the last thing I'm going to reemphasize, instead of screen time, use a lot of intentional verbal environment interpretation. Like, hey, look at this light. Isn't this light bright? Like the stairs, blah, blah, blah. Like have conversations about their environment around them so they can learn to, one, they can hear you talk so that they get word development, but two, the socio-emotional piece, interacting, affirming them, it's something they'll get used to. Their cognitive fluency will become better and better. And I can't see all of you, but I can actually scroll across the top of this deal. And I think if I hit this button right here, I can see most of you. Yeah, I can. Here's what I want to ask you. And I just want you to put your hands up. If you have a kid that's in this, birth to 2 years old, or when your young man was in his birth to 2 years old range, raise your hand, wave at me or something if you did a lot of intentional conversation with them. All right, keep your hand, I'm gonna scroll, all right. Yep, I'm scrolling, there we go. I see some folks waving and jumping, yep, here we go. A lot of conversation, good stuff. Now, let me say this, and this is where I'm going to get into the equity part of who I am. You guys know that at the foundation of me, we talk about a lot of equity and a lot of equity stuff. Those of you who raised your hand, like waved, thank you so much. Thank you so much. There is a study, controversial though, that was called 3 Million Words. And if any of you heard about this study called 3 Million Words, you can raise your hand. This study talked about how in the homes of families that were of higher socioeconomic status, right? Higher economic status, probably middle class, upper middle class to those who were wealthy, that there were 3 million more words spoken in the home to their kids by the time the kid was 5 years old than from a family who came from, say, a lower middle class or for a lower socioeconomic status, right? When you look at that on the surface, because here's what the study was trying to do. They were trying to figure out why was there this vocabulary gap that translated to school failures, right? By the time kids reached first grade and kindergarten. Kids didn't have as many words. They couldn't recognize as many words. Their phonetics weren't as good. Their comprehension wasn't as good. And they did this study and they came out to be, families in this upper strata spoke 3 million more words than families who were not, didn't speak as many. Reason why it's so controversial, because people started making like these racial assumptions or these assumptions about families who made less than a certain amount of money, right? There's always somebody out there who will take data and turn it bad, right? People started making these assumptions. Here's what I thought when I saw this as relates to this. Whenever I've had to defend my position about that study, I've always said, families who are below the poverty line or just at the poverty line, like we were, my mom had to work 2 and 3 jobs to make it work. And so by the time she got home, she wasn't talking to us. There was no big conversation going on. We wasn't about to sit down and have, this campfire conversation. She was trying to feed us, put us to bed, so she get up the next day and do the same thing. And if any of you are in that situation to where you work long hours and you come home and you're tired, right? A couple of things I want you to think about, right? And if you raise your hand and say, hey, look, I still talk to my kids. I talk to them during that time frame. Kudos to you. Thank you so much. It's going to help, right? It's going to help the development. For those of you who, like me, right? And my mom who's tired when they come out to work in 12, 13, 14, 15 hours, I want you to think about being more intentional about saying something, right? About saying something. And not just saying something in terms of teaching them cultural norms, but something that's going to drive their education, drive their thinking. So when I say education, I'm not just talking about what they learn in school and books, but drive their thinking. What do you say to your kid every day or at any point to get them to think beyond what they usually experience in the day, right? Instead of asking your kid, so what did you learn in school today? Because they'll come back and probably say nothing, right? A better question is, what did you learn new in school today, right? What happened to you today that was new? It causes them to have to engage in a cognitive process of thinking, which helps them with their cognitive development, which helps them with their social emotional development because they're having a conversation with you, and also helps them in word development, right? So I kind of want to put that out there. It wasn't part of the presentation, but I wanted to put that out there in order to give you some extra nuggets for free in terms of how to develop this kid as they're growing. Like we tend to have conversations with our kids about things that are just kind of going on. You do your homework, blah, 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 and we go into this conversation that has consequences. But when do you have conversations with your kids that do not have consequences, that allow them to think freely and without fear of being punished or judged? Like those are the kind of conversations that build this word vocabulary, this socio-emotional awareness. Those are the kind of conversations that build that. And so I want to challenge you to do that, right? Anyway, I'm going to move on to the next point. So also during this birth to 2 years old, this stage 1, I want you to focus on 3 things: read, build, and be vigilant. Read, build, and be vigilant. Read to boys and encourage them to spend time in non-structured play. What does non-structured play mean, Dedrick? I'm glad you asked me. Non-structured play is like giving them wiggle room. Boys appreciate structure. And you've heard me say this, and you're going to hear other people say this. Boys do appreciate structure, right? But give them wiggle room to find the boundaries of that structure, to figure out what's good for them, to figure out what's not good for them. Put some music on, let them dance, right? Whenever I see kids, birth to 2 years old, dancing and strutting around, I love to see it, right? Because they're developing this connection with the world and this rhythm. Like let them dance, right? They're experiencing the world. It's they're not being stymied by being put in front of a screen all the time. If you have the ability to in the home, create this little playpen to where they can get in and bounce around. Like, you've created the boundaries for them, but let them explore it, right? Inside, outside, if you have a backyard that you have some space for them, like, don't just build space for the dog, build space for the kid too. Let them run around, right? And play around. This kind of independence, right? Learning where boundaries are and what the meaning of those boundaries are. Those things cannot be taught by sitting in front of a screen. They can't. They can't be taught by sitting in front of a screen. So do you see all of this natural all this natural development that can be lost when you just plop them in front of a screen? Now, I know that, and I'm not, ignorant to this. I know, because of how we grew up, right? We were not, rich at all by any means. And there were times where I didn't even see my mom for days because that's how much she worked. And we would just cross, us going to school and her coming home. And for her to think about all of these things at the same time, just trying to feed us, just trying to get food on the table, just trying to make sure we're clothed. If she wasn't explicitly taught that, I have to forgive her for not thinking about it. These are not things that, like I said, there's no parenting handbook that comes with this, right? So that's why I'm so grateful to be in front of you, right? So that you can have this information, so you can do things like this to develop the independence of boys, even at this age. The whole goal of education is to develop independent learners. Dependent learners are the ones that we read about in terms of, not being able to function. They're still dependent on something. Well, maturation is the same thing. Do you have an independent young man who understands boundaries and who can connect socially, emotionally, who can be emotive? Or do you have one that's dependent on dependent on a screen, dependent on not being uncomfortable, right? This is where you start getting these abnormalities that happen over time in terms of social awkwardness that happens with young men, or the inability to think in a very complex way. So the last thing here is just to really be vigilant about passive visual stimuli, right? And to keep screen time to an absolute minimum. Now, passive visual stimuli also includes just having the TV on. Just having the TV on. See, I know I'm driving down somebody's street right now. Just having the TV on can be an issue. If you're not actively sitting together watching the television, you have the TV on, like, that's, even though no one's watching it, it's on in the home. That's a stimulus that keeps you from engaging in something else a lot of times. So just be mindful of it. Just be mindful of it is the point I'm trying to get to. All right, 3 to 5. How many of you have kiddos in the 3 to 5 range? Raise your hand. 3 to 5s? Any 3 to 5s? I see a couple of hands. I'm gonna scroll across the screen. 3 to 5s. All right, 3 to 5. All right, don't seem like a popular age, so I'm gonna talk about it anyway. All right, so 3 to 5. All right, so let me turn my notes here. The use of technology at this age often increases exponentially as these young men engage in, like, preschool and also in kindergarten, and especially now, right? Especially now in this time, even prior to COVID-19, we were moving more towards a technology-based kind of pedagogy. We talked about using smart screens, and we're talking about using all kind of technology in the classroom, to include using cell phones as a part of pedagogy and pulling curriculum. So now they're starting to get it at school, which means that you don't have to feel pressure to do at home. Now that you know this whole thing about screen time, right? But so you have to be vigilant, and I capitalize vigilant because now their access to screen time is not totally in your hands anymore. It's not totally in your hands because they get it at school, and you don't know how much they are getting at school. And I'm going to tell you this too, and I know I'm going to come across it a little later. But if you have your kid in child care, and And I don't know if you go through the process of interviewing the people and kind of seeing what, the kids will go through during childcare. But maybe this is the time to add some additional language to your questions, right? How much screen time do you give the kids, right? What does screen time look? When do they engage in computers? When do they engage in games, right? And if they say, well, they engage in games 5 hours out of the day, that's a no-go. That's a no-go, right? So be vigilant about that. Focus mainly on educational products, right? So if you're going to put them in this 3 to 5 years old, if they're going to come home and you're going to give them the computer, or you're going to give them the tablet, or going to give them your phone, find some educational games, find some educational things to where they're continuing to engage in the cognitive process of actually learning, right? Things that ask them to speak, right? So we can deal with this issue of delayed word development. Things that ask them to speak, things that ask them to think about how they feel, right? So now they can tap into some of this emotive part of that they tend to miss because of visual stimuli. I'm gonna say this: there have been many workshops, presentations that I've done with teachers around the country around how to engage young men in instruction and how to get the most out of them, right? And I always say, ask action-oriented questions versus feel-oriented questions. So what I'm telling you now, it doesn't go against that, but it's asking you to pull that out of him, to create an environment that will require him to engage in a sort of this emotive feeling kind of space, right? Let me give you a tip. I'm gonna give you a tool. I tell teachers, and I'm gonna write this down so I won't forget it. I tell teachers, if you say, hey, look, here's a scenario where a guy gets out of his car and he's at the gas station and he's going to pump gas. He takes the pump off the pump. He puts it inside of his car. He realizes he wants to go in the convenience store to grab something, so he goes. But while he's in the convenience store, somebody pulls up, take the pump out of his car, and start to fill their gas can up. Teachers would typically say, how do you feel about that? And boys would struggle to give an answer. They'll struggle to give an answer because of the things I'm telling you about. Is because of the late stage development around linguistics, because of the Y chromosome and testosterone's proclivity to pull us towards action-oriented things. So the question to ask is not how do you feel about it. The question to ask is, hey, what would you do? What would you do? And I'm going to challenge you parents as well. When you have conversations with your young men, think about asking a question or posing a conversation in an action-oriented state. Like, what would you do? What would happen next, right? What would you advise I do versus how do you feel? Now, let me say this. I don't want you to pull away from the how do you feel, because I'm telling you now that boys tend to not develop this emotive space. But I want you to be aware of it at the same time. You can say, okay, look, what would you do and how do you think you would feel about it, right? Tee it up like that, right? So if you're going to get these educational products that are going to be on the screens, thoroughly vet them and be really like this parent scientist and say, I'm going to get you educational products that's going to help pull out those things that I know that you don't naturally have, that don't naturally develop well, which is the verbose, the verbal, emotive parts of you. Does this make sense? I hope it's making sense. Now here is this part right here. If you have the ability to do genetic testing, right? If you have that ability to do genetic testing, there's a lot that you can learn from that. And the reason why I say this is because screen time and obesity have a correlation. Obesity has a correlation with screen time. And there are 3 genes in particular, right? That has to do with, gaining weight, right? Now, this is not just for young men. This is for all of us. This is not just, this is for girls too. So if you, women and guys, so if you sitting around figuring out how I can't lose this part of my body, right? No matter how much I eat and work out, I'm about to tell you something, right? Sometimes it really can be in the genes. And here are the 3 genes in particular. There's an obesity gene called DRDO. And that's an eating behavior gene, right? That's the gene that kind of dictates your eating behavior, right? You know, how often you eat, you know, the kind of things that you eat. You know, do you eat when you get stressed? Do you eat, right, when you are nervous? That kind of thing, right? And that gene is DRDO. So if you want to Google that, look it up for yourself. That's one gene. That's one culprit right there. Somebody you can arrest. DRDO. The next person you want to call the police on is MC4R. Call the police on MC4R because that is the gene for appetite. So if you find yourself consistently hungry, you know, or not hungry enough, or like, do some research on MC4R. And here's the one I think we all want to put in jail and sentence for life. And that is FTO, and that's the gene that's responsible for body fat. That's the one that's responsible for body fat. Now, here's the crazy part of this, and this is the thing that I think that's unfair. And I don't know if, you know, God was playing a trick on us, but all 3 of these genes have a correlation to obesity and an attraction to screens. I don't know, to screens, to the blue light. So for those of you who, you know, have that access, that kind of money, right, to where you can go get genetic testing, and I'm not even sure how much it costs. Like maybe somebody Google it up. Maybe somebody Google it and put the number in the chat box. You know, how much does genetic testing cost, right? There are some parents who get their kids genetically test to see if they have a predisposition to, you know, to these genes, right? And if it doesn't cost much, and if you know that these are the genes that are controlling what's happening with your kids, then guess what? If you know that, you better throw every screen in the house outside, right? This is the time to hide the screens, right? Because you don't want to set them up for failure. I'm being kind of funny about that, but you don't want to set them up for failure if you know they have a proclivity towards these things, right? All right, chat room check. So I need to come out of this screen so I can check to see were there any questions. Let me stop sharing and check the chat room.
No questions, Dedrick.
No questions at all?
No, not. I've answered a few questions unless somebody just put one in.
Rachel said 100 more. Ryan, is that how much it cost? Oh, 23andMe is $99.
Yep.
Scott said this is good and challenging. Testing. Okay, testing. Rachel saying testing is $100 more.
Or
Ryan?
more.
Then 2,000 for genetic testing. What is that? 2,000. Rachel, can you unmute yourself and tell me what you mean? Can we unmute Rachel?
Yeah, my bad. It says it's like online. It says it's from $100 to more than 2,000. So anywhere from 100 to 2,000, I guess, depending on what type of genetic testing.
Okay, so 100 could definitely be affordable. Yeah.
Yeah, I just did a screenshot. I was going to put it on there.
Appreciate that. Go ahead and do that.
Yep.
Cool. Good stuff. So we can mute Rachel back. Is there anybody else? Any more questions? Going back in the chat box. Does anybody just want to be unmuted to ask a couple of questions based on the stuff I said before we move into the second part? By show of hands. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
You can unmute yourself if you have a question.
All right. So just by show of hands, I'm gonna scroll the screen a little bit again. Show of hands. How many of you are learning something new? How many of you are getting something out of this presentation? Good stuff. Want to make sure it's worth your while. Good stuff. If you're gonna invest this kind of time, you know, you got to walk away with something. So I appreciate that. All right, here we go. So let's move to the next part. Let me share my screen.
Dedrick, just so you know, they can't unmute themselves. We have to unmute them.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Sounds good. All right.
Also, Dedrick, a lot of the things that you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
I think are also applicable to girls. Not all, but some of the things are certainly applicable to girls.
Yeah, Rachel, I see you couldn't screenshot it. Okay, thanks for trying. But yeah, some of
But
these
the
things.
information's in the chat.
Yep, some of these things are definitely applicable to girls, but some of these things tend to be more impactful towards that Y chromosome and testosterone, right? So, and I just want to give you that, right? Because this tends to be more impactful. Let me share my screen again, and let's get back to the second half. All right, chat room check. Here we go. All right, 6 to 9, stage 3. How many of you have kids that are 6 to 9, or young men that are 6 to 9 years old? Let me just scroll across the screen here. Okay, yeah, that seems to be a popular one. All right, 6 to 9. All right, here we go. All right, thank you. Jonathan, you got a question? Okay, all right. So 6 to 9, in this age range, we want you to beware of the effects of screen on sleep time. So are you aware that tablets, computers, cell phones, they all have this thing in them called a blue light reader? And a blue light reader, so there's this hormone, yeah, I see you, Jonathan. There's this hormone in your body called melatonin. How many of you ever heard of melatonin? Melatonin is a hormone in your body that regulate or causes you to go to sleep, right? Late at night, your melatonin levels should increase, thus making you more and more sleepy. You can buy melatonin pills. They're really expensive. I take them every now and then because I tend to be a workaholic, and I literally can't work all the time, and so I need to shut my brain off. So I take melatonin every now and then. The pills taste real sweet, so like candy. So it's nothing distasteful. But the blue light reader tricks your body into believing that it's time to wake up, and so your melatonin levels actually decrease, and so you don't go to sleep. How many of you have ever found yourself sleepy and you make it a point to go to bed, but you pull that phone out and you check text messages and you find yourself on FaceTime and you find yourself on Instagram, and next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by and you don't know where the 2 hours went, and you're not sleeping anymore, and then you put the phone down, and then it's even harder to go to sleep, and you're trying to figure out how to go to sleep, but then you turn around and jump back on the phone and send out a Facebook message asking who's up. Right. So now you got this blue light backing you again. Right. This can become a problem for school age children, especially because 6 to 9, and this is no judgment, it's just data. Right. This is just what I've seen. In the age from 6 to 9 is when we start to give our kids cell phones. 6 to 9 years old, we try to give our kids cell phones. Well, they take those phones to bed with them. Sometimes parents, you hope the phone put them to sleep, but here's what's happening. It's not, right? That has effects on that blue light has an effect on their sleep time. Here's the recommendation. The recommendation is that kids step away from any screen time, telephone, computer, tablet, anytime, that at least 2 hours prior to going to bed. So if your kid has this natural bedtime to go to bed at 8 o'clock, by 6 o'clock, their screen time, whether it's educational or otherwise, should be done. No more FaceTiming grandma, I gotta go. So I need this 2 hour window for my melatonin levels to kind of build up and allow me to go to sleep, get a good night's sleep and wake up fresh. All right. The last point on this screen, when I say study your son to decide when it's right to give him a cell phone, I also said that I personally, and I've seen other recommendations, would not give a cell phone to a kid that's 9 years old or younger. I wouldn't. That's 9 years old or younger. And I know that there's so many reasons why you can justify given the phone, and our culture now gives us the reasons. I need to get in contact with him, and I need to see if he can get home after school. I mean, there's so many reasons, right? But there used to be a generation that we didn't have those cell phones and was able to parent and was able to kind of get things done. And I'm talking like I was in that generation. I wasn't, but anyway, that's what my grandmother told me. Because the male brain is visual. Once he received that cell phone, I'm reading from my notes. Once he receives that cell phone, look, a great deal of his learning and interacting with the world will go into that cell phone. And we've already talked about this visual distraction. So if he's in that cell phone during this time frame, then we already know all the things that's not happening, right? He's not developing emotively. He's not getting social emotional interaction. The word development is not happening in the right part of his brain. Like, all these things are happening because boys tend to be drawn to things that are visual. So we want to not do that, right? And so this was also the position of Michael Gurian, who is a kind of expert on male development, a doctor around this stuff. He said the same thing. I would not give a young man, 9 years old or younger, a cell phone, right? So I don't know where each of you fall into that category, but that's kind of where I wanted to go with that slide. How many of you have young men from age 10 to 13? I'm going to scroll across the screen here, 10 to 13. Keep your hand up just a little bit so I can see. 10 to 13. Oh, this is the very popular one right here, 10 to 13. A lot of these kids around, a lot of these boys running around, huh? All right. Let me see what we got here. 10 to 13. This is an interesting time, right? Stage 4 is a masterpiece still in tatters, right? It's still unsculpted. There's this early adolescent boys need dopamine, right? This dopamine rush to happen from real life, not through screens. And I'm gonna take a minute to get a little more technical now, like I did with melatonin and cognitive fluency. Dopamine. So dopamine is a hormone that's associated with rewards. When you reward someone with something, the dopamine hormone makes them feel good about it and want to get rewarded again. It's the things that drive kids and us as humans to do things over and over again to get either we're achieving something, or we get a satisfaction, or we get a good feeling out of it. So between this age of 10 and 13, this is when the brain is actually the brain region. So sort of like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, like the cerebellum. All of these things they're starting to connect. These dendrites are starting to connect. This is also what they call the spiritual part of development, where young men start to make judgments, morality, decisions around what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong. What screen time does is it causes young men, if their focus, if their entire focus or most of their focus is on something on the screen, whether it's a video, whether it's a movie, whether it's something that's teaching them morality, teaching them judgment, then they're getting their dopamine rush from that, not from real life. They're getting that dopamine rush from that. Now, say for instance, a young man you let him go and play video games, and he gets Mortal Kombat or he gets Grand Theft Auto. I mean, think about these messages now. Think about what's happening, and at this 10 to 13 years old, that they're making judgments about what's good and what's bad based on things that you are not controlling. This is a very dangerous time if you don't have an equal amount of distraction in terms of putting them in clubs, community groups, church groups, conversations with you, mentoring, other real world things to teach them how to judge good and bad, how to grow up to be responsible young men. If that lesson is being taught virtually or online, then you're not in control of that. you don't know what's happening. You don't know how they feel. So here's the deal. Here's what you can do. If you want your kid to play Fortnite, right? That's huge right now. If you want them to be on Fortnite, if you want them to be Mortal Kombat and some of these other video games that kind of challenge morality, sit down and play it with them. Have them to explain it to you. And if you come across something to where they're killing somebody or they're stealing a car, you stop them and ask them, how do you feel about that? Get a sense of how he is interpreting what he's doing. If he says, oh, wow, that's cool, makes me want to steal a car. Hey, turn the video game off, have a conversation. You know, if he's killing somebody on Fortnite or whatever, Mortal Kombat, and he's like, oh my God, is that what it's like to kill somebody? I would never do that. There you go, right? Now you're intervening. Now you're having a conversation with them, especially in this 10 to 13 years old, because this is when all this happens, man. This is when they start to figure out what's right and what's wrong. This is when they start to interpret this. And if there's no real world moral compass, or if you're not balancing the things that they're going to naturally get outside of you, whether it be in school or whether it be in these video games or television shows that they're binge watching right now because everybody's at home, right? If they're not getting something outside of that, then in this 10 to 13 year range, you know, you're missing an opportunity. 2 years from now, when they become 15 and they start to do something weird and you wonder what happened, you may have lost them in the 10 to 13 range. Where did he get that from? Where did that come from? I didn't teach him that. You're right, you didn't teach him that. But you didn't balance it out, but you also didn't balance it out. So I need you to pay attention to this age range. There were a lot of people who raised their hand when I said you have somebody in 10 to 13. I'm telling you, I'm almost in tears even thinking about it because this is important. I don't want you to miss this. I don't want you to miss this. So these are things that are happening that you can't see. Like you can't see dendrites growing from cerebellum to amygdala to frontal cord. You don't see that. All you see is I got to get this dude a haircut every week. That's all you see. But you don't see everything that's going on under that. And you're missing a big part of it. So don't miss that. Testosterone is flowing like crazy right now. Puberty, they're getting into puberty. They start getting hairs in places they ain't seen hairs before. So they're trying to figure this out, you know. Should they get this cut at the barbershop or not? You know, all these kind of conversations like, hey, wait a minute now, you know. So testosterone is flowing. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're getting hairs on their chins and all kind of places, right? This is the time they also get very awkward. In this 10 to 13 year old range, and parents, if you agree with me, throw your hands up, wave them like you just don't care. In this 10 to 13 age range is when they start to be very forgetful. You got to say things 15 times. You know, you ask them why they did something, they'll say, I don't know. Really, they don't know. That's the truth. They don't know. Because there's a whole lot of things going on to where their brains are rewiring and skills and cells that they haven't used are being pruned. That's right. Your brain, your body naturally prunes things that you don't use. How many of you who went to school, raise your hand, took a foreign language? Let me scroll. How many took a foreign language? All right. How many of you remember how to speak that foreign language fluently? All right, Jonathan, I see you. Maybe you're one of the few. All right. Charles, you got your hand up. Charles, he said that he, you know, I can tell you this. I took 4 years of French, and I'm embarrassed to tell you I took 4 years of French because I don't use it. So what happens is your brain starts to prune that, you know. I play golf. Golf is one of those sports to where you have to, you know, you have to give it time, right? But if you don't play often, then, you know, you lose those skills. So during this time, there's a bunch of stuff going on with a young man, right? Dendrites are forming, brain regions are connecting, things that he's not using are being pruned, things that he are using, the brain's making more space for it. If you have him in front of a screen, all of this is retarded, right? Which means it's slowed down. All of this is threatened. It's threatened. So a good standard to think about when you think about, okay, well, Dedrick, well, what's good screen time, right? And I told you a few minutes ago that a good standard screen time use can be, does this screen time that he's engaging in help develop his character, his moral development, right? If it doesn't, then you ask yourself this question: am I putting him in situations outside of the screen time that he's getting that? Like, does he have a mentor? You know, do I regularly take him on fishing trips and have conversations with him, or bowling, or whatever it is that you do, golf, right? Is he in a church group? Like, is there something that's teaching him to be a good person, to be a good man, to be a responsible man, to not take advantage of people, not be manipulative, not be misogynistic, right? Is there something in his life that's doing that? Do you have somebody that can do that? If you're not married, like, do you have a brother who's an uncle to him? Do you have a friend, right? Do you have a boyfriend? Are you engaged? Like, do you have somebody in his life, a man that could have a conversation with him about just good judgment? If not, then, he's at risk. He's at risk. Adolescent brain, did you hear my notes? Adolescent brain needs, which is age-appropriate cognitive, physical, and emotional development with an uptick. Hear me now, uptick. And I saw one kid a few minutes ago on the screen as I was scrolling through. If you're on here again, this is the time where you need an uptick in character and moral development, right? Character and moral development during this 10 to 13 years old. Develop as much of his time as you can towards websites, movies, things that teach character. Like, we all have seen these feel-good movies to where you get chill bumps and you want to cry, you feel good, like, wow, man, this is a really good message, right? Have your kid watch that with you. Ask conversations about it, Don't just watch The Voice together, watch movies like that together, right? Get him into community programs that develop character. Raise your hand if you have your young man that's in this 10 to 13 age range. And even if they're not in this 10 to 13 age range, raise your hand if you have them in a community group outside of school, outside of home, that that they're getting some character development. There's some good people around him helping him to make good judgment. Raise your hand if that's the case. I'm just scrolling for a second. Good stuff. All right, good stuff. That's super important. Raise your hand if you had that conversation with your young man. Raise your hand if you are intentional about having conversations about making good decisions and being a good person with your kiddo. Okay, good stuff. All right. Nobody wants to not raise their hand on screen, I see. Good stuff. I love it. All right, so this next screen. Porn. Y'all ready to talk about porn? We're going to end our conversation on porn. So during this 10 to 13, so if you have your son with you now, just know the conversation is about to get a little bit real. So if you're cool with that, I'm about to have a conversation with you about what's happening around this 10 to 13 year range. Let me scroll through and see if that kid is still on here, because he might be trying to mute the screen for his parents. Don't listen to this. Age 10 to 13, this is where young men start to masturbate, particularly around the 12 to 13 year range. Now, sometimes this happens a little bit later, but masturbation is pretty normal at that time. Now, let me do the air quotes for normal, right? Because normal is dependent, right? You can look at studies and you can call your doctor and say, what's typically normal for masturbation rates, right, during this time, right? Here's the deal. Male sexual function is directly linked to the brain. In the brain, to visual stimulation, which is why porn is so attractive at this time. Remember I told you about this visual stimulation? This is why they get stuck. Think about it. Think about what's happening. It's the perfect storm. You got hormones raging, testosterone, which is the sex hormone. Testosterone is the sex hormone and the aggression hormone. it's being produced at massive levels right now. He has this testosterone wash going across his brain. He can't remember anything. He's very forgetful. He's getting into puberty. Oh, by the way, boys have this natural proclivity to gravitate towards visual things. And now you take all of these hormones that's making him feel some kind of way, and you have porn. So used to back in the day, right? It took a lot to get your hands on porn. You had to get a magazine. You had to hide the magazine. Like, it was all kind of stuff, right? You hide the magazine. You know, you had to sneak and watch an R-rated movie. Not today. Not today. You can log on to any website. You can turn on any movie, and there's sexual and graphical content that's going on. And if you have a young man that's in that 10 to 13 year range watching with you, I need you to be aware of what he's really thinking about, or what he could be thinking about. This is the prime time, especially 12 to 13. I know this is 10 to 13, but that 12 to 13 is when this testosterone, these hormones start kicking in. And if there's an access to porn, oh, by the way, let me just say this, because there's something out there that's pulling them towards this, right? I'm going to flip for a minute and talk about girls. This same age range, 12, 13, is when girls start to mature and their bodies start to develop, and they are also trying to figure themselves out. And guess who they're showcasing themselves to? The 12 and 13-year-old boy who can't figure out what's going on with him either, right? So you have to be careful about that porn. So here's how I want you to think about it. Don't overreact, all right, to normal visual sexual curiosity and normal masturbation. I told you to define normal. You know, maybe I can do some research and let you know what normal is, or could be, but I'm a little leery of that, right? Because everybody's normal is not other folks' normal. But don't overreact to it. You know, don't shame him. You know, what are you doing? What are you serious? Are you really looking at that? Like, don't shame him. Have a conversation with him about what are you thinking about when you're looking at this, right? If you want to have that conversation, like, you have to be in a place to have that conversation yourself, right? If you don't have the words to have that conversation, you're going to fumble that. You're going to mess it all up. And both of you are going to be sitting there figuring out what just happened, right? Keep strict tabs on websites your son visits, his phone, computer, tablet during this time. Now, he may come back and say you're invading his privacy, but guess what? As a parent, you have the right to do that. Like, you just have to get past that. You just got to, you are responsible for the outcome of your kids. And if something happens and you look back and say, I didn't do everything I was supposed to do, then, that's something totally different. But if this is a concern to you, right? Now that you know, if you have a son in this age range, that there's this proclivity towards porn, if that's a concern to you, I'm saying, check the websites. You guys know you can go into the history on a computer and pull up all the websites that have been, all the places that they've been. Now, if they slick, they'll just delete it, right? But, remember, he's 12 and 13 years old right now. He can't remember anything. Maybe he forgot to delete it. So you can go check it all out. His phone, is he taking pornographic pictures and sexting them, sex texting to people? We all know what that can lead to, right? But this is when they start getting in trouble. And if you discover that he visited a porn site, check the site out, check it out for yourself, right? And if you're a lady, you can also talk to another man and say, look, I caught John on, porn.com or whatever it is, right? And he was looking at this. I just want to have a conversation with you about what he may be thinking, what's going on. How should I have this conversation with him? If you find that to be a difficult conversation. Now, if you feel, if you have no problem talking about sex and porn to your kid at 10 to 13 years old, then by all means have the conversation. But if you find it difficult and want to be thoughtful about it and make sure you're not saying anything that's going to shame him or make him feel bad about it, then have a conversation with someone to kind of get your words together. Let me give you a book. Yep.
This isn't about porn, but the question was, and I don't remember if this was in the last group or not. is the 2-hour window on screen time the same for TV watching compared to things like the cell phone or tablet computer?
It's all screen time.
Okay.
All screen time. I'm going to give you a couple of points of research, but I do want to just end this thing about porn.
Here, one more thing. I'm sorry, then I'll stop. One more thing in the chat. Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is a good book to open up conversations about porn.
And I'm gonna give you a second book. Here's a very mom-friendly book. It's called, now don't laugh at the title, but it's called Slippery When Wet. It's a mom-friendly book, like it really is. I mean, get the book. And I know the title is funny, but get the book. It's called Slippery When Wet. It's a mom-friendly perspective on what's normal for masturbation for adolescent boys. Haven't read the book myself. In doing my research, I found it and asked moms about it and said, yeah, I've read the book, right? So, Deborah, what's the name of the other book again?
Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is a great book. Yeah, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures.
Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. All right. So I'm going to end on that. I want to leave some time left for questions, some additional questions. Let me go back in the chat room. So all these 31 messages in it, they're not 31 questions, are they, Deborah? You pulled the questions out? Oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
I wanted to give you something about research. So one of the reasons why rental car companies establish a minimum age of 26 to rent cars, 25, 26, is because that's when the prefrontal cortex, like if you're not watching me, watch me. That's when the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain, which is your executive functioning, moves from emotion to logic. So rental car places are saying that I need you to be as logical as possible when you're driving my cars, right? I don't want you to get into road rage. Now, I know we probably know some people who are way above 26 who still have road rage and trying to run folks down, right? Hopefully you're not one of those. But where I was going with that was there's also research around the reason why movies are the length that they are. Can somebody tell me what's the average or typical length of a movie? Who said that? 2 hours, exactly. 2 hours. So if the movies are telling you like, hey, I mean, you have some movies like Malcolm X and that stuff goes on for 4 hours, right? But for the general movies are somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes, because the science behind it is saying that we can pay attention and not be distracted or either have negative kind of reactions up to 2 hours. That's why 2 hours is set. So with that, that's it. I think I see.
Okay, here's a question.
Yep.
Does having their boys listen to audio stories before bed have any harmful effect?
So let me say this. I think anything that causes cognitive engagement prior to bed, I would stay away from, because how many of you have ever started to read something or thinking about something with work or you get into an argument with your wife or your girlfriend and like you can't go to sleep because it's on your mind, right? What's recommended is that you get meditative things to listen to prior to go to bed. If you have to hear something, right? Pandora has this station that I even use. It's called the sleep station, right? And so it has like sounds of rain and thunder and like wind and stuff like that. It also has a spa channel, right? SPA spa channel that, if any of you get massages like I do, you know how you go in the massage room and they got this little plan type deal. It has that stuff. But anything that causes you to think, like your brain will continue to go. I was just in this space last night. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning for the last 2 nights in a row because I have some projects I'm thinking about. and I can't get it out of my head. So that's not promoting sleep. That's not allowing my melatonin levels to get me where I need to be. It's in direct competition. Any more questions?
It's very hard for me to talk to my son about sex since I'm a single mom. What do I do?
Araceli, yeah, just like I said earlier, if this is a difficult conversation for you to have, I don't know if you have, a trusted person in your life who, they have a relationship with that you can kind of leverage, whether that's a man or a woman, that can have that conversation about sex. But when you have a conversation about sex, like, I just don't want this to be a random conversation. Like, the conversation about sex should be prompted by something that has happened. Like, if you have seen them looking at at porn or a magazine, or seeing something like sexually explicit, that's the time to have the conversation, because that's the natural space to have it. Just to call him downstairs, hey, John, come here for a minute, let me talk to you about sex. That's odd. That's like, whoa, wait, mama. So have the conversation in natural moments.
Okay, they were looking for the book, so I found it on Amazon.
Okay.
So I put that out there. Any other questions?
$15.99 can be your guide. I'm a single parent. I use natural.
Well, I also put in there your email address. So if anybody comes up with any other questions that they think about afterwards, this was a good conversation, a very real conversation. And we have to have these types of conversations so we can just make sure that we're staying on top of what's going on with our boys, and certainly our girls as well. But I think we'll probably have to have you back so you can talk about the older kids as well, because I think that will be helpful since we've got a lot of high schoolers.
Yeah, Deborah, I want to say to you and to the crowd, guys, thank you again for receiving me. And I hope that every time I do a presentation, period, about anything and wherever, I want to leave you better than I found you. Like, I want to leave you something to think about, right? Even if it's controversial, I don't want you to say, well, I don't remember this presentation. I am a teacher, right? That's my gift. And I try to break things down in a way to, even if they're complex, like, we can all grab them and grab a hold to them and try to figure it out. So big takeaways I want you to take away is limit screen time. Remember, melatonin is the hormone that controls sleep. Don't fight with that prior to bed. Shut down any electronics 2 hours before they go to bed. Around that 10 to 13-year-old range, make sure that you are really actively talking about character and more development. You have them in groups and clubs that do that. And then this idea of cognitive fluency, and cognitive fluency is, how easy is it to think about something, right? What's the ease of it? And also remember this, that boys tend to be more spatially and kinesthetically driven than verbal and emotive from the heart, verbal and emotive. So as a parent, you have to pull those things out. So know that that's sort of a deficiency, quote unquote, but you have to pull those things out of him. And that's how you develop a natural boy versus a digital boy. Thank you so much.
Just a couple more things. Natural moments and books help with the conversation. We've got a great series of parenting books about sex from a Christian worldview called God's Design for Sex. There's a question, my son uses his phone a lot. How do I back him off? He's 16.
My answer to that question is what happened at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. He's at that age now to where like, they grew up using the phone, but our culture also reinforces the use of phones. I would ask this question, I think it's Laurel, like how often are you on your phone? How often does he see you on your phone? Does he see you on your phone the first thing in the morning? Does he see you on your phone when you drive? Does he see you on your phone? Like some of that is he's just going to do what he see you do and thinking that that's okay. If you yourself are trying to back off of your cell phone, or just use this as a tactic, right? Say things overtly like, you know what? My screen told me that I've reduced my cell phone usage like 20% over the last week. I'm so proud of that, right? Like you have to like say those things in front of him and then ask him the question, how much have you used your phone? Because there's a way you can go on and check screen time and see how long you've been on the phone. Like use this passive way to make time on phone a thing. I've been so happy in my own life when I get that message from iPhone. If you guys have iPhones, I don't know if Androids do it, but I know iPhone will send you a message and tell you how much screen time you've used and if you reduce screen time and whether you spend more time on social media versus other places. I love watching mine go down because I'm always having this competition with my wife about screen time, right? So I like to throw my stats up in front of her. So it's a thing with us. So make it a thing. But he's 16 years old. And I don't know when you gave him the phone, right? If he had a phone since he was 10, good luck. Just now you got to start having those conversations about reducing screen time and even challenging yourself.
Okay,
Ready?
well,
Yeah.
I think some of our parents are saying we definitely need a session for older, and modeling is a better teacher than lecturing. And those of you that have gone through Sandra's class on parenting skills, she talks about that all the time.